Call me old-fashioned, but when you reach an agreement in a conflict and then the enemy is saying, great job, guys, we did it, we won, that's not a good sign. And that's what's happening in Gaza right now. In fact, we've got videos of members of Hamas openly celebrating in the streets, which, good for them. They found those uniforms that they hadn't been wearing in combat for the last 18 months or so. But also, this ceasefire, even if it actually goes through, and it is kind of falling apart at the seams right now, wouldn't even go into effect until Sunday. So I don't know that I'd be wearing those Hamas headbands out into the open in the middle of an active war zone, but hey, to each their own. Now, I had a friend yesterday reach out and say, hey, I'm not following this conflict at all. What's going on? Where did this ceasefire come from? Is it a good thing? And the best way I could describe it, he asked for the Cliff Notes version, right? And I said, the Cliff Notes here is that both sides were pressured into creating an artificial end to this conflict. And the reason I said that is that if you look at the demands that both Hamas and Israel have laid out in previous ceasefire agreements, a lot of those weren't met. So it kind of raises the question of why now? And they were probably pressured, both Israel and Hamas, probably from the United States, is the generally accepted view at this point. And what we're seeing right now, in the U.S. at least, is we've got Trump supporters saying this is a great victory for Trump. He achieved what Biden could never do. He came into office, he threatened everybody, and look at that. They all came to the table before Trump came into office. At the same time, around the same agreement, we've got all the Biden supporters saying this is a great achievement for Joe Biden. He's been pushing this for months on end, and they finally culminated this ceasefire just moments before he left office so they can actually attribute it to the Biden administration. Meanwhile, Iran is actually pretty happy about this, as is Hamas, and the Israelis are pissed. So I don't know, to the Trump and Biden supporters out there trying to latch onto this as a major victory, maybe take it easy for a minute. It's still pretty spicy in a lot of ways. So what we're going to do today is dive into what we know about the deal so far, the response from some in Israel, as well as the axis of resistance that, spoiler alert, they love it, they're celebrating, and then what we can expect here going forward. Now, looking into the outline of the deal, it's not drastically different than ceasefire proposals that have been put forward in the past. So we have a few that we can go off of at this point. This does, at this point, recording this the morning of January 16th, it does look like it's going to go into effect in a couple days, but we are already seeing some pushback from inside of Israel saying Hamas is starting to renege on some of these agreements already. So keep that in mind. This timeline might change. But what we know right now is that as many as 33 Israeli hostages are set to be released during the first phase of this deal. Some of those are children. It's also not clear how many of those 33 are actually still alive, which is tragic, but also like a key component of this. Some of those 33 that come back might be the deceased bodies of the hostages. Now, in exchange for those hostages, hundreds of Palestinians will be released that are currently being held in Israel, and it's a wide array of charges all over the place. Like, some of these are serving life sentences, it sounds like. There's others that were probably in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's going to be a net benefit to everybody that they're no longer behind bars. So I'm certain as this ceasefire goes forward, you're going to see a wide array of examples. You're going to see people cherry pick the people that probably shouldn't have been detained at all, and then they're going to cherry pick the other side that are, convicted murderers with Israeli blood on their hands that are in the process right now of being released. This phase would also include the first phase, the Israeli withdrawal from all populated areas in Gaza. Gotta assume they mean previously populated areas in Gaza, because if you look at any recent imagery of the Gaza Strip, a lot of places people used to live, there can't be anybody living there now. And the first phase would allow for a surge in humanitarian aid to come in to the Strip. The second stage and third stage would be negotiated during the first stage. So this is one of the reasons why this kind of, to be overly pessimistic here, and I will have an optimistic take at the end, we'll get there. This kind of just looks like politics at this point. So this agreement is not an end to the war. Phase one is kind of setting the conditions to start talking about a possible end to the war. And that's what happens in stage two. Stage 2 is designed for both sides to come together to find an end to this conflict, where all remaining Israeli hostages held in Gaza are going to be returned in exchange for more Palestinian prisoners, along with a full withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip entirely, all of them out of there. The third stage then would be the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip and the return of any remaining hostages' bodies that were not recovered in phase 1 or phase 2. Now, what was not mentioned was what's going to happen with Hamas. And from the outline that we have right now, they're going to stay in power. They're going to retain control over the Gaza Strip, which has been a hard line for Netanyahu and the Israeli government from day one. Following the October 7th attacks, was Hamas cannot be allowed to remain in power in the Gaza Strip. This agreement kind of looks like they will be, at least as of now, which again goes back to the earlier statement of it seems like a fake end to this conflict was pushed on both parties. So that whole Hamas being allowed to stay in power, they're pretty happy about it. The leader of Hamas in Gaza right now, Dr. Khalil al-Hayya, said, quote, "What the Qassam brigades," that's the militant arm of Hamas, did was dealt a fatal blow to the enemy entity and will remain in the annals of history. The Iranian IRGC, or Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, put out a statement saying, "The holy will of Hamas and the Islamic resistance has triumphed over the Zionist entity and the killers of innocent and defenseless Palestinian women, children, and men. Today, the end of the war and the imposition of a ceasefire on the Zionist entity is a clear conquest and a great victory for Palestine and a greater defeat for the brutal Zionist entity. Today, the Zionist entity and Tel Aviv are the ones who submit to the will of the invincible Palestinians." I mean, you don't really have to read between the lines there, right? This is the axis of resistance. We got similar things from Shiite militias in Iraq and the Houthis and what remains of Hezbollah up in Lebanon. They're all praising Hamas and saying, "Great job, guys. You did it. You won." So, that's not something that Israel probably wants to see. In fact, turning to Ben-Gvir, the Israeli Minister of National Security, he went on a long rant, kind of outlining the side inside of Israel that is very, very upset with this. He said, quote, "The deal that is being formed is terrible. I know the details of it well. It includes the release of hundreds of murderous terrorists from prisons, the return of Gazans, including thousands of terrorists, to the northern Gaza Strip, withdraws the IDF from the Netzarim axis, and returns the threat to the residents of the encirclement, thus effectively erasing the war achievements that have been achieved with much blood by our fighters so far in the Gaza Strip. Not only that, it does not lead to the release of all the hostages, and seals the fate of the remaining hostages who were not included in the deal to death. This is not a hard choice that must be made to return the kidnapped. It is a conscious choice at the cost of the lives of many other Israeli citizens who, unfortunately, will pay the price of the deal with their lives. We have already seen the fruits of these deals in the past. We learned the hard way that there is no cover for the promises that, quote, we will get along later." And Gvir raises a good point here, where there's an estimated 100 plus hostages that remain in Hamas captivity, and phase 1 of that deal is only addressing 33 of them. Now, the numbers have varied a little bit based off of what we've seen, but either way, there's a pretty good delta there between 33 on or about and 100 on or about. And then Netanyahu actually chimed in just earlier today, kind of throwing cold water on all of this, suggesting that the deal might actually not come to fruition. Now, it's hard to tell if that's because of something Hamas did, as Netanyahu says here in a moment, or because he's facing increased domestic political pressure. But either way, it is a bit of a change from the optimism that was kind of percolating across international media yesterday. Netanyahu in his statement said, quote, "Hamas has reneged on parts of the agreement reached with the mediators in Israel in an effort to extort last-minute concessions. The Israeli cabinet will not convene until the mediators notify Israel that Hamas has accepted all elements of the agreement." Now, turning to what we can expect going forward here. For starters, the ceasefire is not in effect. Not yet. Like, even if both sides say, yes, we agree to it, it doesn't go in effect until Sunday. So you are still going to see military activity in the Gaza Strip. I noticed yesterday that this was leaked, that a deal was reached, and then people were up in arms because Israel is still carrying out strikes against Hamas militants in portions of Gaza, suggesting that that was like a violation. You are going to see a continuation of military activity until the day that this ceasefire goes into effect, assuming that it does. So right now, I'm at like 90% certain that something will be reached by this weekend. But that does not mean, not by a long shot, that hostilities in this aspect of the war are over. So again, it leaves Hamas in charge of the Gaza Strip that has, over a population that has arguably seen a pretty significant increase in anti-Israel sentiment over the course of the last year. And then it pulls all of the Israeli troops out of Gaza. So I don't think it's crazy to say that the condition that this ceasefire would lead to is essentially the same as October 6th, before Hamas carried out their brutal attack into Israeli territory. They lost a lot of their leadership, certainly. They lost a lot of their military capabilities. A lot of their infrastructure has been destroyed, but the group responsible remains in power with arguably some more radicalized fighters now in their ranks. So we'll see. And again, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade. So the positive side here really is that any hostages coming home is awesome, right? And there are supposed to be some very young children included in this release. Can't imagine how happy their families are. And any pause in death and destruction anywhere is generally a positive step for humanity. However, there is a very real danger here that a false peace can set the stage for an even deadlier and maybe even longer war in the near future. So just something to consider. But again, this story is developing, so we'll try to keep an eye on it and update you as we go. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.